In this video, I'll show you how I paint dark, medium, and fair skin tones with watercolors. It was interesting trying to explain what I'm doing because most of the time when I paint, I'm still experimenting. But I think I came up with a pretty good way to visually explain my thought process. I've broken each skin color down into just 4 basic colors. First is the base color, which is the lightest of the 4. Then a darker version of the base color. You could almost think of these as being the same color or 2 ends of the same color on a gradient, which is why I'm blending them here. Third is the blush color, which doesn't necessarily mean blush like makeup. You'll see what I mean a little later in the video. And the 4th color is the shadow. Shadows aren't technically part of the skin, but I'll explain that more a little bit later. So here's a quick overview of the colors I'll be using. Go ahead and pause if you want to read it. These are the faces I'll be painting. I've just outlined them in ink so that you can see what I'm doing more easily. First we'll do our base layer, which I realized I put in the wrong tray compared to my chart. But it's fine because we'll be using a bit more of this color anyway. And we're just going to kind of drag the pigment around the face, letting it pool in areas you want it to be darker, and then adding more water in areas where you want it to be lighter. Even intentionally leaving some areas white to create kind of a highlight. You can always fill them in later if they're too stark, especially with the darker skin tones. I find that the highlight is often nice if it's a nice golden color versus the white, which can look a little bit hollow. And for this first layer, I'm using a combination of like a yellow ochre and a kind of hot pink with a little bit of brown. I'm using a Winsor & Newton palette, their Cotman palette, and the color names are ridiculous. I don't even know most of them yet, so they'll be in the description if you want to know that part. It might look like I've moved on to the second color, but this is still the first color. Just another layer of it on paint that's still slightly wet, so I'll kind of blend it in with the wet paint to create gradient effects. I'm also adding a small amount of the blush color to further blend in with this gradient skin that we're creating. And just while it's drying, it's important that you keep an eye on it and blend out any areas that create too harsh of a line, unless that's what you're going for. For the medium skin tone, we start with a similar golden color. It's that same combination of yellow ochre with hot pink and a tiny bit of brown. You'll see that the areas that I tend to leave a little bit of white space, or at least lighter, are the tip of the nose, the tops of the cheekbones, and the center of the lower lip. Sometimes a little on the forehead as well. I like to give myself a larger area of highlight than I think I'll need because you can always blend it out later. It's easier to add more paint than it is to try and take away paint. And for this light skin color, I used mainly pink with a lot of water and a tiny bit of the yellow color as well, which I ended up adding more of here because it was just a little bit too pink. So once that first layer is dry, you can go in with your second color. I probably should have painted the hair in advance, but oh well, just try to ignore whatever I did just there. This second layer is where we're really going to define the features of the face, get the shapes down, the shape of the forehead, make it nice and round, the shapes around the eyes, where the eyes kind of meet the bridge of the nose, how far the nose comes out. All that good stuff can be defined with this color. For the dark skin, I'm using the colors from the base layer, plus some extra brown and some purple as well to cool it down a little bit. For this layer, it's fun to experiment with different techniques of using wet on wet paint versus wet on dry. If you use wet on dry paint, you can get more of those crisp edges, and that can actually help you define, that's what I'm doing right here, that can help you define your shapes a little bit better, and it'll create harder lines versus those smooth gradients. I personally like to have a combination of the two, of the smooth with the hard lines. I think it creates a cool effect. I'm not really going for realism so much as just like letting the paint flow and pool and kind of create unexpected little shapes, and I don't know. Normally I'd be adding more colors at this point, but I wanted to keep it simple for this video and not make it too crazy. I am adding a little bit more blush to this layer, even though this technically isn't the blush layer. I like to get started on the blending process pretty early on. For the medium skin tone, I also did a combination of the same first colors with the addition of more brown, and I also added a little bit of a muted green color, which I think makes it a nice olive complexion. For this one, it's just equal parts of the pink and yellow with a little less water than I did before. So like I mentioned at the beginning, this isn't necessarily blush like makeup, although you could apply it that way if you wanted to. It's actually more the areas of skin that will see more sun or are pulled tight over areas with a lot of blood vessels like the nose and the cheekbones. Or at least that's what I've heard. I could be totally wrong about that. For the dark skin, I'm using a burgundy that I made with red, brown, and purple. For the medium skin tone, I thought a peach color would look nice, so I mixed red and pink with a little bit of orange. And I like to apply the blush not just on the cheeks, but also the nose, the lips, around the forehead, on the ears, and on the tops of the shoulders. So the shadow color isn't actually part of the skin, but it is a very important layer when painting skin because it shows where the light is falling across the skin, which is really important for creating depth on an otherwise two-dimensional surface. For all three of these portraits, I've done a really simple light source, which is just basically in front and slightly above each of their faces. So from that we can determine that the light would fall below the brow bone, around the eyes, below the nose, below the lips, and below the chin. If she was facing the light straight on, then there would barely be any shadow. The higher up that the light source is, the further down the shadow will go. For this shadow, I'm using a mixture of blue and purple. We don't need to add any skin tones to the shadow because we're already painting on top of those colors. So when this color dries, it'll be a nice blend of both the shadow and skin colors. Because of this, I think you could use any of these shadow colors with any of these skin combinations and it would probably turn out looking pretty good. One important thing to remember when painting portraits is that you want to wait for the skin to dry before you add the eye color, lip color, or hair color, because otherwise it can bleed and look kind of scary. And I forgot to do this step, but if you want to add some freckles, just use your second color. I had a lot more information I was going to try and squeeze into this video, but it's already pretty long, so I think I'm just going to stop there. Hopefully all of that made sense and is actually helpful. When I was creating this guide, I noticed that for each example, my second color was the same as my first color on the next darkest skin tone. So I guess I did have some kind of formula without really realizing it. So yeah, those are all my secrets for painting skin. Give it a thumbs up if you learned something, and definitely subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.